Hello and welcome to the Annie Altman Show, the podcast, Season 5. Welcome to the 8th episode in the Communication C series. Today, I am so stoked to be here with Avram Ellner. Hello, Avram. Avram is the first, of course I'm saying that on air, Avram is the first podcast guest. So this podcast, which when Avram came on it 2.5 years ago, was called True Shit. And it would not have started or be happening right now without this human saying, yeah, Annie, I'll come on the podcast and be your first guest. Yeah, sure. What do you want to talk about? Cool. And we recorded, and it did not say, the audio did not work. So we recorded a second time after a big laugh. And now Avram is halfway through rabbinical school at the Ziegler School in Los Angeles. He started his own, that's like I'm about to introduce you onto the podium. Avram now has his own podcast you can check out on all the platforms. It's called I Only Have 5 Minutes, and each episode is about 7 minutes, which is a great joke on Jewish goodbyes and verbosity. And they're so good and they're so fun to listen to Avram talking about a Torah portion and bringing together podcasting with this ancient tradition of sharing a weekly portion and talking about what's going on in this story that we've had for so long in this book and what's going on in the world right now. And we're going to do that in some way here, talking about punctuated equilibrium and bringing in a fun science term to talk about philosophy and feelings, and who knows, we're going to see where it goes. Thanks for sitting through that whole introduction about you, Avram, and thanks for coming on the podcast. And I'd love to turn it over to you to say a little bit about yourself in your own words for people listening to you for the second time.
First off, thanks, Annie, for having me back on. It's a real pleasure to be here, and especially, given the current state of affairs, I think there's something really special about being able to reconnect and maintain connection with people that you're close with. So I really appreciate this opportunity today. And as you mentioned, the experience that we had, doing that first podcast, I sort of kept that in the back of my head, and it inspired me as I got further along in my studies that, perhaps the podcast platform could be a way to share some Torah, which is how the idea of I only have 5 minutes. There's an interrobang at the end. Don't forget that. As a podcast came to be. So it's, can we talk about something thoughtful about this weekly Torah portion every week? And, one of the things that I'll say is obviously the podcast is from a Jewish lens, but it's not exclusive to Jews. I think anybody can listen to it and get something out of it. So it's on all streaming platforms. And if you want to check it out, would love to hear what people think about it.
It's so cool to me that you started a podcast and that you found a way to bring together things you already like doing and were doing and bring in some new things, and like, oh, duh, I could do this thing.
Yeah, and I guess, yes. I probably should also clarify where I am at school and all of that, huh? Yeah. So I am in my 3rd year of studies at the Ziegler School of Rabbinic Studies in beautiful, sunny Los Angeles, California. Grew up on the East Coast, and it's been nice to get out west. So.
And now, like, doing more of the LA stereotypes, doing the podcasting game.
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, I think, Annie, I think you and I have spoken about this. Part of the goal of like this whole thing is, can you become the best caricature of yourself that you can become? So I think if you can like lean into that, it's good,
The whole life thing is to be your most stereotypical caricature,
Yeah, I think that's part of it. And like, you got to be able to laugh at it, and you got to not take yourself so seriously,
Totally. And it's so cool and it's so fun and comforting and all the things for me to hear that from you as someone who's in rabbinical school, because I feel like a lot of what well, I mean, now it's just like to jump way into like immediately like organized religion and these things for spirituality and all of these, and it can get really stuffy and it can get really serious and it can get really like, even in self-care practices and that, getting this like super, well, I need to meditate every morning in these exact minutes and this, and like so rigid, and forgetting about all the room to play and make art and laugh at how ridiculous all of us are. And I think too, I guess as I'm saying all this out loud and my brain is like going to our first podcast about self-consciousness and how we're all self-conscious and we're getting parts of ourselves reflected in other people and then insecure and awkward and like interested in it and curious and all the things, is that it's like to be our caricature self is showing that vulnerability, is showing some part or saying that thing and like stepping into yourself, as they say, as I'm saying now.
Absolutely. And I think related to that, or at least something that I've been sort of thinking about, in my studies, I've gotten really into using, and people have been writing about this for a while, but learning more about the use of mythology as a lens for religion. So Joseph Campbell and Mircea Eliade, writers like that, and that this idea that you use, myth as a part of religion. It's not that myth does not mean false. It means that it's a story to explain why things are the way they are, how they are, how things are the way that they are. And I think part of that also, right, like part of the tension is in religion is the individual, the tension between individual and, society or community, and how that plays out. And it's interesting, I think, how these different concepts play out in society versus the individual. And I think one of the pieces with mythology is each of us creates our own myths about ourselves, whether we are conscious of it or not. Like, we're always writing this myth about who we are and who we're not, and we're writing myths about the experiences that we have. And I think the self-talk, positive or negative, is a sort of deep stream of that. And I think where we get into trouble, I know where I've gotten into trouble, is when we forget that we're the authors of our myths and we take the myths as dogma. Because if we start taking them as dogma and as sort of something that's come down from on high, it doesn't feel like, that's the way it is. And when we're able to remember that, oh wait, like, I'm writing this. Oh wait, I get to decide what this means and what this doesn't mean, because I've been writing it since the beginning anyway. I think it empowers us to make those changes that a lot of us try to make, but find it really hard, And I think the first step is reframing it. And I think the reframing is to remember that you're writing the myth. You get to sort of decide what that stream of self-talk looks like, or you get to decide whether to listen to it or not.
A huge reminder, and that's huge too with this sea of communication and how you're communicating with the myth you're writing. And I very much personally needed to hear that about, I still like, I connect myth with lie, and myth is some sort of falsehood rather than like what you're saying of myth being a story, and that's it. And then, okay, well, if you're taking a spiritual or a psychological, even more of a scientific zoom out approach, who's writing the story? Going from there. That brings up in my head, in other Avram related things that I love, the article that you wrote about devotion versus discipline, and how it's another like classic goofy life paradox thing of like things aren't black and white, and also there are black and white things. Duality does exist. It is, are you saying nice things? Are you saying unnice things about yourself? Are you devoted to yourself? Or are you disciplining yourself?
Yeah, and I actually, okay. I think a big part of those two concepts, or those two words, devotion and discipline, kind of the real difference is what's the narrative that you're spinning around what you're doing, and sort of like what's the intention behind why are you getting up to do yoga in the morning, or why are you struggling to get up to do yoga, or to pray shacharit, or something like that, whatever it is. Are you looking at it as, I think sometimes we look at these practices for growth as, I need to do this, and then the parentheses piece is, I need to do this because I'm a terrible person. And that's not my thought. So Mark Manson, who is an author and a thinker and a writer who I really appreciate, talks about this idea that so often we tack on because I'm a terrible person to our thoughts, whether we realize it or not. And I think a big part of this is recognizing the implied sub thoughts that we have, and recognizing that it's there, and then saying, okay, do I want to keep this, or do I want to throw it out? So like making the shift from discipline to devotion, it's not, I'm doing this out of like true grit or true will, or a feeling of like inadequacy, like to get to the devotion place is like, I'm doing this because it aligns with my values and the things that are important to me. And to come at it not from a place of deficiency, but a place of values. And that's not to say that discipline is all negative. Like, discipline is still important, but I think it's a slippery slope to using discipline as a way to actually further chip away at your self-esteem and morale. So it's it's the muddy middle.
The classic middle path they all speak of.
Yeah.
And where is discipline, from my personal bias, where does discipline become self-flagellation and self-loathing and all of those? That's such a good description of it, of consciously or subconsciously tacking on because I'm a terrible person. And I feel like so much of in my experience, that like desire to heal, I need to get better, I need to help heal other people, all of these things, it can really come from this focus of communicating on some level that there's a problem, that there's something wrong, that I need fixing because I'm bad and wrong and terrible, and bringing up all of this guilt and shame with whatever the thing is. That like, we're not supposed to talk about. How dare you talk about, like guilt, shame, sex, drugs, rock and roll, like death, birth, like things that it's like, no, don't talk about. We'll talk about that inner part that, who's met someone who has not ever had some thought of, I'm shit, I'm doing a shitty thing, I'm a terrible person, this is bad.
Yeah, totally. And it seems like a lot of, I think generally speaking, people that other people find insightful, or things that people find insightful, I think for the most part are actually individuals who bring up things that are implicitly known or implicitly understood and make them explicit, or people that sort of dive into those, exactly what you said, like those taboo pieces. Somebody that I think of is all the work that Dr. Brene Brown has been publishing over the years around guilt and shame, and how her work really highlights, the intricacies and the dynamics, of all that, and shows how to engage with it in a thoughtful way. And, that's important work.
Super important work, and I'm super glad you brought her up, and this is a perfect segue to tying in and bringing in the next piece of punctuated equilibrium. And Brene Brown is an example who punctuated the equilibrium of shame and vulnerability and social sciences studying, and then also how that opened up so much space and encouraged so much more for people to keep communicating about that same stuff. It's like, how do we talk? Someone has to go first.
Yeah, and somebody has to go first after nobody going first for such a long time, right? Like it's no different than think about I don't know, think about being at a pool party or being at summer camp around the pool, and like somebody's got to jump in first. And then once that one kid is like, okay, fine, like I'm gonna go in, then like everybody else comes in. And just to decide, to take a step back for a second, right? We're talking about punctuated equilibrium, which is it's a concept from evolutionary biology that if you're looking at the evolutionary record of species, that for the most part they're in stasis for a while. There isn't much going on, and then something changes, and then on the geologic time scale, so we're still talking a long period of time, but from the frame of reference of geology, not a long period of time, that there's rapid evolutionary changes that happen, right? So there's not a whole lot going on, and then in a relatively short period of time, there's a bunch of change that happens, and then it goes back to kind of just hanging out for a bit. So, you and I started this conversation, but it's interesting to think about how does that concept, how can we use that as a metaphor to explain other aspects of our human experience? Is it a helpful metaphor?
The pool party one too, and thank you for taking the pause to explain the science part of it, and also bring up the pool party metaphor of it's chilling at the party, no one's in the pool's totally empty, and then that one person is like, fuck it, I'm going in, and then all of a sudden a bunch of people are swimming, and then later no one's swimming again, and woo, the waves.
Exactly.
And using science things as metaphors, and using that same, making up words to communicate different patterns and different commonalities and different trends about how stuff happens, to learn more how to keep it happening. Like, as far as I know, you're the first. Is anyone else doing a podcast like you're doing, with talking through Torah portions?
There are definitely podcasts out there that discuss the weekly Torah portion. There are definitely Jewish text podcasts that exist. Excuse me. I haven't seen one that's focused on being sort of a shorter form digestible chunk. And certainly I haven't seen any. Yeah, I don't know, but there's nothing new under the sun. Okay, so I'm not going to claim that it's the first whatever, but it seems to be a good model, and people seem to be digging it, which is cool. My attitude with it is, can somebody listen to this and for anything, really, can somebody be exposed to whatever this media is and walk away from it with either a new idea or a new question? And that's my goal, is that whoever listens to an episode can walk away and say, I didn't think about it that way, or but that now I have like a question about this. And I think that's kind of the point.
One might say you're wanting to punctuate their equilibrium of their humaning, like plant a seed or like bloom some new thought or feeling.
Yeah, and you never know if we're gonna really stretch this metaphor thin, you never know what's gonna set off that sequence in the geologic time scale. And oftentimes it's just you don't see it coming, and it usually comes from a place that you never expected it to come from. Like,
cliches are cliches for reasons. You go though. I had to interject that.
No, it's okay. I think specifically from a Jewish context, oftentimes when, if we're looking at Torah text, um, the moments of theophany, right? Moments when an individual has an interaction with the divine. There are a couple different ways in which it plays out, but one of them is hearing the still small voice, and that's very different than the dramatic image we may have in our head of the sky parting and all of that. That actually this moment of connecting with God, the divine source with a capital S, whatever you want to call it, um, oftentimes is so subtle that if you're not paying attention, you'll miss it. Now, I've heard a really interesting take on Moses and the burning bush. I think this was from Rabbi Lawrence Kushner. I think it's him. That the whole test of the burning bush was that would Moses notice that the bush was on fire and that it wasn't being consumed, and that he passed the test because he realized that there was something different about this moment. And so, yeah, it can be random stuff, but it's like, are we able to recognize those moments that have something different about them, even if it's something we're not expecting?
First consciousness C, which we talked about inadvertently on the first one of self-consciousness and what are we aware of. I also love, I gotta say too, the fact that you have a secular Jewish podcast. That it's like intended for everyone and you're really going into what is the human lesson here.
Yeah, I would respectfully say I don't think it's secular. I would say that it's
I apologize for disrespecting the label.
no. It's not disrespectful at all. I would, if I were to characterize it, I would say that it's a deeply religious podcast, which is also pluralistic and is open to everybody. Um, and I say deeply religious, and I'm not saying deeply dogmatic. And I think that there's a distinction between religiosity and dogma.
Do you want to
So
go
that's
a little bit more? I also kind of feel somehow like equilibrium connects with that in some way. You want to like kind of talk about those words a little?
yeah. I think it's that it's the tension of what you're doing and why you're doing what you're doing that we sort of been discussing. And you know I think a big piece of that is, we talk in Judaism, we talk about kavanah, which if we're gonna translate it to English, we're like, what's your intention behind what you're doing. We talk about the kavanot of our practices, of why are you, what should be your intention when you're doing this ritual practice or when you're saying this prayer. And I think where we get into trouble very quickly is if we lose that intention. And like, yeah, you have to have the observance pieces or dogmatic pieces, or I think there's a part to play, but it has to be tempered. It has to be balanced. Um, it's kind of like another sort of phrase that's thrown around a lot is spirit of the law versus letter of the law. And you need to have both. You can't just swing to one side. I think you have to be in the middle ground. It's complicated because it's not clear cut and it's gray and it's muddy, and you got to make decisions. But I think there's actually kind of a richness in playing in that space.
how do you, in that space where it is muddy and gray and all of the paradoxical yes ands of intention being everything is energy and everything is intention, and also like you're saying too, the unknowns, the things that maybe aren't what you expect, or it comes up in some way that the metaphor of, wait, why is that bush not being destroyed, or what's going on here, and how to I think to tie it to that point of, wait, I'm a bad person, wait, hold on, what am I doing wrong here, all of that stuff, a lot of it for me comes to the like the grayness and the muddiness of that line of awareness and consciousness, where I'm aware that I can't be fully aware. I'm aware that it's like, it's classic overthinking where it's like, well, I don't get to know all of my intentions, or, well, what if I actually have this subconscious intention and I don't know that I have it, and all of those, how to come to, okay, what are you doing and why, and how can you be nice to yourself in your process along the way, and yeah, you're gonna mess something up and that's okay. And like you said too, this feels relevant to pop in again, of there are no new ideas under the sun. You're not doing anything original. You are unique and beautiful, and also it's been here before. It's going to be done again.
Yeah, right. None of your problems
Exactly.
are unique. You know, at some point
Say with
in
love.
this, yeah, totally. You know, it's not, it doesn't. It's good that you point that out, because some people can get very bristly about that real quick. And
Even though it's a very loving and logical thing to say, because it is the truth of logic of,
yeah,
go through grief. All humans hurt their body at some way.
and it's not, it doesn't devalue the validity of the individual's experience. You know, you're just placing it in context. Um, and I think that's part of it, like recognizing that somebody at some point, and definitely more than one person, has dealt with the thing that you're dealing with. And I actually think that should be a level of comfort, to recognize that you're not alone in having to navigate this experience. Because the other piece of that is, there's a good chance that you know somebody that has gone through that experience. And, you know, we're talking about communication, going back to that piece of those experiences where it feels like, like nobody can understand this. Oftentimes it's, nobody ever talks about this. And so if you're able to then, you know, going back to Brene Brown, if you're able to then be vulnerable and share with somebody what this thing is, oftentimes you'll kind of be surprised to hear from that person, whoever it is, that they probably went through something similar. I've really found that to be very true, talking to people that are older than us. And I think that there's a lot of deep value in having those conversations with people that have a few more decades than we do, because that I think also helps recontextualize things. Because, you know, there's the age gap, and there's an experience gap there, and we can use that to, I want to say our advantage, but we can learn from that gap. Because for us, you know, the screen or the map is popping up as we go, and it feels like what is this, like how do I deal with this, where, you know, they've got a couple miles on us, and you can say, yeah, you know, went through something similar, and like this is how I handled it. And I think that's I feel like that's a sort of interaction that can sometimes be overlooked, or sometimes people aren't quite sure how to go about having that interaction. But I think it's a really valuable and a really important one.
It's so real to all of that. One of the first thoughts that popped up too when you said about it being overlooked is that I feel like because it can't be measured, because like evolutionary biology and different sort of social psychology things, like all these operational definitions and things that both of our science minds of like bio and physics are like, but there's no numbers to this. How do we measure this? We can't. And what we can measure is that there's a value, there's a change, there's some shift in action and behavior that happens later from having that moment with someone where they're like, essentially, it's going to be okay. Maybe it's not okay right now. It's going to be okay in the long run. And here's some different options of tools that you can explore to help it be more okay, or to help it be more you in whatever you're doing.
Yeah, right. And from our horse blinder perspective, that experience is a totally new and novel data point that we have no idea what to do with. And for somebody who's been on the path a little longer, we're we're able to get more information about what that data point is from them because they've already engaged with it. And yeah.
Totally. You're someone I feel like for as long as I've known you who has made that a priority and sought that out and put energy into that, both of rabbis at school and also of physics professors of yours, and with the communication to like ding that bell again, that to me you've always seemed to really prioritize time to check in and talk to those people and ask what's up and ask their insights.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know who gave me that piece of advice when I started college, but I'm forever indebted to whoever that was. I wish I could remember, but throughout our 4 years at Tufts, I spent a lot of time talking with a lot of different professors. And I spent a lot of time, there was a period of time where I thought I was going to be doing physics professionally as an academic. And in sort of the pursuit of trying to figure out what could look like or could not look like, I asked a lot of my professors, so how'd you get here? What sort of happened that you're now, teaching relativity and cosmology or teaching quantum, mechanics or biophysics, whatever, thermophysics, whatever it was. And what's interesting about talking to people that have more life experience and talking to an array of different people, because I didn't just speak with my physics professors. I spoke with philosophy professors, anthropology professors. I have a distinct memory of having a conversation with Professor Saul Gittleman of Tufts fame, who taught the intro to Yiddish culture class. And I lucked out. I was able to take the last section of it before he stopped teaching the class. But I had a conversation with him about, how'd you get here and have you been here for however many decades he's been at Tufts? And I think the most interesting thing about like connecting the dots of all of those interactions, the vast majority of people I spoke with said it was always an out of the blue thing that they weren't prepared for or weren't expecting or weren't pursuing, that basically an opportunity fell in their lap. There was an opportunity that they saw, and this is like the important piece, and they took the risk on the opportunity that they saw. So like, not only is it the opportunity, the piece that you have no control over is the opportunity piece of like whatever that random thing is coming and presenting itself. But then the piece is, calling, okay, bet, right? Like, all right, like show me, let's see what happens with this opportunity and taking the risk on it. And then everything kind of just unfolded for most of these people after that. And I think that's really, really interesting. And at some level, comforting and probably terrifying that so much of it is just stuff that pops up. But it goes back to recognizing the value of the potential opportunity in front of you. You know, you got to see the burning bush.
Put that as a quote with on a poster board with your name on it. You gotta see it, and you gotta allow it to see you, or you gotta like allow yourself to take the pause to. You're in your equilibrium, and then the punctuation of something falling on your lap or something, and or for the metaphor of choosing to punctuate and take the risk, be vulnerable, put yourself out there, do the thing. Because you're like, well, this is here, that like I may as well, or I may, like this feels right from some inner voice or some inner part of me that.
Yeah, absolutely, right. And on the flip side of that, you know, think about when opportunities present themselves and immediately you start thinking about all the reasons why you can't pursue that opportunity. You know, and sometimes those concerns are legitimate. And I think a lot of times those concerns are our default setting of trying to stick to the script, you know, and the script is only as interesting as what's being written. So to then just stick with it, like, you know, you got to push back against that. And it's hard, you know, it's hard because it's the point where you start believing in it. And so you get to that point to say like, okay, but like, let's think about this in a different way. And maybe let's not immediately think about all the reasons why this won't work out or why it's, you know, why the potential risks outweigh the possible benefits, you know.
I can't be the first person to jump in the pool. What if it's cold? What will other people think? Oh my gosh, what if the
Yeah, I'm gonna get water in my nose. Like I don't like you don't want that. But it's like everybody gets water in their nose. Like it's gonna be like you're fine. You're gonna be okay.
You're gonna be okay. Do the thing.
Yeah.
Do the jump. Well, and also to again that point of coming to remembering that you write the script, that you can change the script whenever you want. Which again is that same to me often both empowering and terrifying of, oh my gosh, I'm writing the script in every moment. Oh my gosh, in this moment I can whatever, oh my gosh, now it's a new moment. Like if I give a voice to that internal dialogue that's like, it's always a new moment. I'm always in the process of writing it, and then by the time I notice I'm writing it, I'm on to this next thing, and the fuck?
Yeah, and I think tied to that is this this underlying fear of wanting to always write the best thing.
Speaking right to my inner perfectionist. People put because like it has to be the right way to be a human and do my script.
Yeah, and it has to be perfect, or yeah, you know, you can get so hung up on trying to write the right thing that you wind up not writing anything at all. And the point is not to be writing the right thing. The point is to be writing. You can always go back and edit, you know. That's the whole point of writing a draft and revising. And you know, it's constantly a revision process. You know, I think about, you know, writing papers. A quote unquote final draft isn't even a final draft. It's just the draft that you're submitting based on time constraints. So like, and when you're choosing to say it's done, So I think we have to, I think it's really important that we give ourselves the agency to be the authors of our own myths.
It's cool the ties of this with our first episode in self-consciousness and that, like, well, I can't write the thing because it's not going to be the right thing to write. And
Yeah, it's not going to be the right thing to write, or who am I to deserve that?
which you
And
said,
then huh?
you brought this up on the first one too. Who am I? And Brene Brown talks about that too, with shame of like, who am I to get to write my own script?
Yeah, I think I think I even mentioned this during the first episode, right? T.S. Eliot's The Love Song of J. Alfred Prufrock. Like, dare I disturb the universe? Or, I'm paraphrasing, but it's like, who are you not to? Right?
Oof.
And again, like, it's so easy to get caught up in that.
So easy to get caught up in that. It's interesting too, this is bringing up for me when you brought I have a new idea for a consistent podcast question, and rather than beginning it with asking people to share who they are in their own words, which can feel maybe more daunting because it feels more of a like, write your script right now, how do you identify, what are your identifying labels, to go into how did you get here? Like what you were talking about of asking mentors and really asking, what are the life things that led to me asking you to come on this podcast and you to say yes?
Yeah, no, exactly right. Because like that first question, I think a lot of people have been conditioned to answer it as somewhat as an abbreviated resume, right? And you just I went to school here, I'm working this, I'm studying this, blah blah blah, and like all those pieces are important. And it's also like, okay, I could have looked that up.
Yeah. Well, and it's to that quote you're bringing up, which is so good to hear again, of who am I to disturb the universe? And that comes up so many times with people of, who am I to go on a podcast? Oh, you want me to come on your podcast? Oh, I don't know. I don't really like talking. Oh, like, who am I to go talk about this thing? When I have with every episode still that I record and put out, and the whole name of the show was based on a friend gifting me this name and me saying, like, my ego hates that just enough to learn something from this of, who am I to have a podcast with my name in it? Even though if someone else did that, I'd be like, cool, you're using your name and you're like, all of those questions. I have an idea. If you're open, you go first. You had something on the tip of your tongue. I cut off.
Sorry, I'm trying to find. I can't find it. It's just what you were talking about of the tension between ego and individual versus being connected to the larger thing. I had just read an interesting Ram Dass quote on that. I'll have to find it, but just kind of spark that light. Yeah.
Oh, whenever you do. Ram Dass is probably the most quoted person on this podcast, which is unsurprising to no one given him inked here.
He's a good guy to quote.
Very quotable. He punctuated the equilibriums of many.
Yeah.
Which also to me is catalyzing, like that punctuation.
Yeah, exactly. It's got to start somewhere.
And you brought up another of the sea of connection, and that connected to the larger whole. And that whole, I'm allowed to be a human connected to all of these other humans here, and there's space and there's enough and there's abundance, which can be a great word and a buzzwordy word of, for everyone to be their most stereotypical themselves. Be your own meme.
Exactly.
Okay, I have a request for Avram meme for using the C's up to the C that we're talking about of communication, and using the connection overarching C however you want to. I'd love to hear like whatever, how you want to make up of maybe one sentence for each thing, or just like some sort of continuation of how in your mind to go from, and I can like walk through the order of consciousness and self-consciousness that we talked about with the first one, to choices and changes and compassion and communication. And also that feels like the time to point out that you were the first person to point out to me too about the tree of life and 10, 11 points and these things of, again, no new ideas under the sun, punctuating it with different, or just showing, communicating the same idea in different ways.
Yeah, the Kabbalistic system of the 10 Sefirot is a whole, it's a separate podcast series in and of itself, but
Maybe our next third episode.
Yeah. Great. So walk me through it, and I'll see what I can piece together.
Okay, cool. And whatever too that feels helpful for you to share, and I would love to get to hear too and learn from your perspective. So much of you is in all of your studying of life things and rabbinical things, of where the overlaps and things.
Sure.
Okay. The C that connects the C is connection, and the first C is consciousness. The second C is choice. Those are the first two.
So how consciousness connects to choice?
Yeah, like how does it, do you feel like it transitions? Like in the equilibrium of one human. First, you're conscious of being human.
Well, I think what's
first or two other, you'd rather do like definitions. Maybe I'm cutting off too. My self-consciousnness is coming up. Like if you talk about the definitions of the word to you, or like how you use it.
No, it's okay. Can you just go through all of the C's so I can see it? So I can see it. I hate myself for that one in my head.
Be your Piscean sea of emotions.
Oh, I'm 100% a fish.
Consciousness, choice, change, compassion, communication, community, creation, charge, curiosity. Good one, good timing. And courage. Good timing for my self-conscious mess up. Well, it brings up so much self-consciousness for me with this stuff when I'm also like, but how do we talk about, here's this framework. How does it help you? How do we learn?
I'm thinking about it. I'm looking at it, and the first thing, and this is probably an annoying response. I wouldn't look at them in a linear fashion. I'd probably throw them in a circle, or some sort of web.
The tree
just
of
to,
web, right?
Sort of. There are different.
More linear still.
There are different formulations of it, but it's possible. The way the diagram is set up, it's basically possible to get from any sphera to another sphera through the different paths that are outlined. So, not that anybody can see this, but if you're starting at Malchut, there are a bunch of different ways to get to Keter.
Hold up more for the YouTube people, please, if you can.
Hold on.
That's good to know that about it being an open system that anyone can get to another one.
Yeah, and the channels are sort of laid out that way. So I think that's the first piece I would look at.
I love you having fun right now.
Oh, you gotta get the stuff together. But you can sort of see in this that each of those points is a different sphera, and there are different paths that connect all of them together. And so I think you could probably, we want to talk about symbols and things like that. I think you could come up with a symbolic representation for all the C's that was sort of in that spirit, right? Because also, like, life isn't linear anyway, you know. So that's the one piece. Now, if we're gonna like play with the order that you did give, I think it's really great that you started with consciousness, because that's kind of the underlying substrate of all of this anyway. And so then I think you sort of see.
Love you calling it a substrate. Science.
Well, we get it's, I think it's just a question of like what you're getting brainwashed by and by whom, so it's like what's the Kool-Aid that you're going to drink. I don't know, maybe that's an off color reference, but here we are. So if that's the sort of foundational piece, we're kind of looking at how all of the other C's are, I would say, categorizing or labeling you're coming up with type forms or types of interactions or aspects of consciousness. So like choice and change and compassion, and I can't read my handwriting. What's after compassion? Sorry. Communication. Thank you. That it's all, all of them are just kind of describing what's going on with consciousness and what's going on with it in a human context.
I like that. So how with consciousness and the C of communication? We're communicating our consciousness, because this word gets like too meta and too self-conscious and fun ways of, as soon as you open your mouth, you're communicating your consciousness because it's your consciousness that's communicating.
Yeah. So, I would say let's abstract communication a little bit. That communication is, right, the transfer of data from one system to another. Right. If we're gonna get like really, strip away pieces of it. So if we're talking about like data transfer, and then we're talking about data transfer within the context of consciousness, there are a couple levels of this conversation, right? It's like what level of consciousness are you talking about? Are you talking about consciousness with a capital C, meaning like meaning God, or meaning the consciousness that pervades everything? You talking about consciousness with a lowercase c, so like let's say between two people or two plus people? You're talking about internal consciousness of one individual. We're talking about self-consciousness a lot, but I think the point is, regardless of what level you're talking about, you're discussing the transfer of data, the communication is ultimately the thing that connects the dots and creates the system and creates the web, right? Like even in, no matter what level you're zooming in or zooming out of, communication is the glue that keeps all of it together. And I think that's really important. I mean, because nothing would function without it.
The equilibrium of this whole system. And the connection, like, yeah, there's communication that happens on an inner level, and also there's the communication that happens transferring data between two people, three people, whole groups of people. And then two, one of the things that popped into my head when you were saying that was about how ideas and concepts and that the data is eternal, to say like my most science spiritually sentence. It wouldn't have punctuated without this podcast. The data is there. You can't kill an idea. It is there. It's not going anywhere. You're like, well, any history actually has shown that there's some dark things to discuss here.
I mean, look, at the very least, right? There's even Hawking radiation out of a black hole. There's still.
What is that?
Basically, when stuff gets sucked into a black hole, the late, Professor Stephen Hawking was able to show that there is radiation, and therefore there is information and data that actually is emitted by the black hole. So it's not like it's really lost anyway. It just kind of gets scrambled.
Energy is neither created nor destroyed.
Also that, yeah. There's a whole conversation there about like the relationship between energy and information. But,
Will you give me like a couple sentences on it?
Oh, I don't know. It's I think it's really interesting that there is an entire sort of branch of scientific inquiry called information theory, of looking at how information is processed and transferred and communicated, and how it exists, and like what is it like, or like what is information?
Do you feel like information is the equilibrium? And maybe like punctuation is when it goes like you plateau and then you get a lot more information, and then you plateau to like learn all the things around that new information, and then you keep like the stair steps of life where you like learn more, and then you learn there's more to learn, and then you learn more, and then you learn there's more to learn.
Well, I actually think that
linear of me again.
I think the parts of our lives that feel like we're in stasis before the moments of rapid growth are our moments of, or our periods of data collection and information collection, whether it's, I mean, we are constantly collecting information and data, right? And I think the moments where you have the rapid growth as described by the punctuated equilibrium model and metaphor is when somehow we're able to, one, synthesize the data and information that we've acquired, and two, integrate that synthesized information into our lived experience and how we choose to live our lives and how we choose to construct our identities. So I think it's kind of like, whether you realize it or not, you're like pulling in all this information and all of this data, and it kind of, you get to the point where either there's a critical mass of it, or you have an experience that everything kind of clicks. Like I sort of think about, one of the things that I've definitely learned is that it's one thing to know something, and it's another thing to understand and accept it. And I think those moments of understanding and accepting the things that we know, I don't know if we really get to decide when that happens.
In my experience, that's a hell no.
No, which is why it kind of feels like, going back to the pool, because obviously everybody wants to hang out in the pool. You're just like treading water for a while, and it can feel like that. And then there's like that external thing that happens, and it starts to click together, and then suddenly you like you like level up or go up a step, and then you're sort of treading water again. But I think it is that cyclical process of acquiring data and information and experience, synthesizing the data and connecting the dots between everything, and then integrating it into your life and actually using it to inform the choices that you make moving forward.
That's so well said and so clear of like, I love hearing your physics mind come out a little bit in this, and your rabbi mind come out a little bit of, without also being like, you're not being like, here's how you do this human thing. And like, you collect, you synthesize, you integrate. Lab, here's your human lab experiment manual.
No, because you have to keep your left brain in balance with your right brain. You gotta take the type A personality and the type B personality and smush them together. I forget what type A and type B is, but right, your left brain is sort of logic, linear, da, 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 and your right brain is more of the intuitive thinking, feeling piece. And at some level, right, like your corpus callosum is like one of the most important parts of your brain because it connects the two of them together. And you want to talk about communication and connection and consciousness, like having those two hemispheres in communication with each other is really important, and everybody has a natural tendency towards one or the other, but that doesn't mean that the other one is inaccessible.
Ooh. And I would say in both of our experiences, having gone from one of them so rigidly to the other one, like going from one intensity to the other, maybe again that sort of need for outside reflection. No one exists in a vacuum. No one exists in a black hole. And having help along, we're all walking each other home, quote, there's the Ram Dass for this one, of helping along the path of which side of the brain do you want to go to more in this moment, or how do you bridge the gap between them two, which is like so cool for me to get to see so many people be doing now, where you as a prime example of someone with a physics degree who's in rabbinical school and will forever have both of those parts in you.
Yeah, and sometimes it's sometimes the balancing is more of a pendulum. You swing to one side and then you start going back to the other, and you have to look at the balance as being something that occurs over a larger time scale. It's like, okay, like maybe I'm really like here for 4 years of undergrad or whatever it is, 5 years, but maybe I'm here for a chunk of time, and then maybe I start swinging back to the other side for a couple of years, and maybe you go back afterwards, or maybe the swings of the pendulum are smaller, so it takes kind of less time. I don't know, but I think that's also another. It's okay to be in the place that you're in. Like it's all right. Because if you don't like it, pretty soon you'll be somewhere else. And flip side, if you do like it, you'll be in someplace different too. So it's you're not always going to be wherever you are, but it's okay where you are.
Very helpful reminders. I'm curious too, I wonder if on the whole, like over the whole zoomed out course of someone's life, if actually we all are in some equilibrium between left brain, right brain. the whole like there's masculine and feminine in all of us, and we do maybe show more of this outwardly or this whatever, or people do connect more with one or the other, and also we all have all of it in us.
Yeah, no, I think that is part of it. It's interesting. I took I took your question in a totally different way. At first, I thought you were saying like if you looked at the world population, what would the breakdown be of right-brained dominant versus left-brain dominant? Would it be close to 50-50? Does the earth skew, does the world population skew one way? Does it shift over periods of time? Like, do we have periods of right brain dominance, periods of left brain dominance? We kind of, then if you really want to like go down the rabbit hole, how does that correlate to astrological cycles and things like that?
And astronomy, all of it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And classic. Well, let's look at the Saturn. I mean, people have mapped out huge civil rights and like huge civil movements to do with Saturn and Mercury retrogrades and all of these, but yeah.
Well, this, the conjunction was supposed to be a big one. I think, not sure how much more I can say as coming on as somebody who's a rabbinical student, but I know that was supposed to be.
You're coming on as a human. You're not coming on just as a rabbinical student.
Just immediately get barred from any jobs for just mentioning astrology. Just
how dare you say the conjunction, Avram?
Yeah, just get immediately blacklisted. Done.
Sucked into a black hole. It is an interesting question and like thought of, because maybe there are part of what was my question with that was like, I don't see you as fully left brain or fully right brain dominant, and I don't see myself as fully one of those either. And also maybe we both are in ways that I'm not being conscious of. And the point of then zooming out to like the whole humanity of people, where I feel like it is a pendulum swing, both like politically in this country and also socially from the world at large, from the very teeny perspective I have on it, where it does seem like it goes through. I mean, and now I'm thinking too of a very, I'm going to say Jewy, which maybe is offensive to someone, a very Jewy guest who came on the podcast.
Playfully anti-Semitic. Yeah, in the name of John Mulaney.
Yeah, David Kraftschow, who came on and was talking about the like 1,000 years of the masculine and 1,000 years of the feminine, and these different bigger, like zooming out historically of humanity going through, like what you were saying, maybe the pendulum is way more right brain and the pendulum's way more left brain, and then we figure out, oh, actually, the brain needs the corpus callosum.
Yes, this
podcast has been in other really Jewy things. To keep that again has been very gestury for me. Very gestury.
Oh, no, you have to. I mean, are you really even communicating if you're not using your hands? Right? You have to.
It's so like no facial expression and no movement.
So taking this like a little more seriously for a second, that's like a huge, so much of communication is nonverbal too. And I know we've been sort of in this nice conceptual bubble, but I know one of the things that's been really challenging during the pandemic is having lost so much of the nonverbal communication that is in regular human interaction. I think it's important to name, it's important to note that our communication goes beyond just the words that we're saying in the tone of our voice, which is why all of the hand motions, which also is like, it's a little bit of an East Coast thing too, but it's why they're so important.
I'm really glad you brought that up. And even in this of like the two layers of both things with the pandemic and with connecting more virtually, and also even with connecting virtually and even in us existing in this conceptual bubble on Zoom and talking through these different philosophy things, there's still all the layers of communication of how the flow of it goes and your tone, and I'm again to things that can't be measured fully by science of you can feel when someone's listening, when someone's engaged or not engaged. You can feel when, or even just then the awareness and the time to slow down and be like, oh, actually, I thought you were saying this and I was answering this thing, or oh, actually, that question didn't really work and what is this thing? And there's all of the, even sending someone a text message and you're like, hey, how are you? And it's still saying so much more of like, I'm thinking about you, I'm asking how you are. They're like all of the layers that come in.
Yeah, I mean, well, don't even get me. Texting is even worse because there's no there's no tone of voice. You know.
I hear you. It is, and it's weird and it's strange too and cool to have all these different forms of communicating with technology. I was bringing it up more in the sense of the layers of what's happening without words at all times, even in something that is so purely like you're literally just sending words on a screen or an email, and it's still more than just those words that are being typed. And then yeah, all of the mental fuckery and different like technology evolving faster than humans. So how can we even understand this form of communicating when we're still being like, how do we write a book? Like, how do we like share a story with someone?
Yeah, God forbid you also send an email with the wrong closing line. You know.
The social faux pas, you mean?
Yeah, best comma.
That's wrong. That's not how you're supposed to sign off emails, they say.
No, I look. I'll talk about a tangent. It depends. It depends on the context.
I'm gonna text. I want to text like all of my. I'm gonna just only end text messages to you now with like best, Annie.
Good. As long as it's not capital case K period. But like it's interesting is like people, we've picked up on like what there's been like a whole level of semantic and like people have talked about this, so it's not interesting. But we've adapted to understanding what these things mean.
The equilibrium keeps changing. It's the equilibrium.
Well, because it's well, not that specifically, but I think maybe we spoke about this. The goal is not static equilibrium. The goal is dynamic equilibrium. So it's like things are constantly moving and changing, but like we're in a place where it's balanced. This is the East Coast hand signal for balanced.
East Coastism. I'd love to end with if there are any sort of true, like I'd be really curious to hear the tools that are most helpful to you currently, that maybe are helpful to someone listening, maybe then it plants some seed for them to explore some other tool for you, and that self-communication and that both like the equilibrium with yourself, the dynamic equilibrium with yourself, and also that piece too that I feel like has been such a thread here of acceptance and accepting the thing as it is. No,
Yeah.
you're just looking for your favorite tools on being a human at this level.
Favorite tools on being a human on this level. Great question. As somebody who's an introvert, I've found it's been really important for me to make sure that I both have quality, smaller scale interactions with other people, and to also have quality alone time by myself where I'm doing something. So the first piece it's like interactions like what you and I have, these conversations, and like being on this podcast and being able to talk is really awesome. Um, I've been seeing a therapist for a number of years, and I think it's really important to get the message out that it's okay to see a therapist and it's actually a source of strength, and that everybody has stuff that they need to unpack and process, and you can't do it by yourself. And so I think what's connected with that is also sort of, recognizing what your bandwidth is, recognizing what your limits are, in in a Freemasonic context, you can only go to the length of your cable toe. Everybody's got limited bandwidth, and recognizing what your bandwidth is and not beating yourself up about it. That's been something that I've really been sort of sitting with lately. And it's you do what you can do, and saying no to stuff because that it's beyond where you're at right now, because in saying no it allows you to focus on other things that are one, really important, or are two, require a certain amount of attention that you need to give them. I think is really important. um, and a lot of it is kind of figuring out ways to remind yourself of this. In terms of the personal aspect, the quite honestly, and this, I don't know, maybe to some people this is going to sound like a plug for the podcast, but the truth is, I don't do the podcast for anybody but myself. And I love the fact that other people appreciate it and other people listen to it, and that it resonates with other people and gives other people to think about. And I'm super grateful that people do value it. And I do it because I really enjoy it. And it's helped me carve out time to engage and immerse myself in Judaism in a way that feels authentic to me. And there are no there are no external factors on it. And so I think if you can find something, and it doesn't have to, it doesn't have to be a creative pursuit. Like, it doesn't have to be super big. It doesn't have to be super small. But I think, especially right now, finding like one thing that you do for yourself, because, and this is, I think this is like the other piece, like the real underlying piece is, we have to learn to be selfish. And I don't mean selfish at the expense of other people. I mean selfish in the sense of recognizing the things that we need, and recognizing that our needs are valid, and that if we don't advocate for what we need, nobody else will. And it's not a knock on anybody else, but you want to talk about ways to dissolve or chip away at the implied because I'm a terrible person, and ways to start to dissolve that negative self-talk. I think the biggest piece is allowing ourselves to take the space and the time for the things that we need, because we need them. And it's, we're allowed to need things, and we're allowed to make choices for ourselves and for our benefit. And again, I'm not saying that selfish at the expense of other people, but just being honest with yourself of like, look, there are times where I need to just not have interactions with any other human being for a little bit. Like I know that there are times where I just need to be alone. And acknowledging what you need and not beating yourself up for it, I think is both incredibly challenging and difficult because so many of us have been conditioned in one way or another to be ashamed of the things that we need. And if we're able to push back against the myth that's been imposed on us and to write our narrative and our story in the context of acknowledging and honoring the things that we do need, I think that it it helps heal a lot of things, and it sort of helps bring you to a better place. And that's what we're all trying to do anyway. So I hope that provides at least some things to chew on related to what you're talking about and what your question was. Great question.
Great answer. I needed that sermon. Thank you. Oh, I needed that sermon. One of the ones too, when I really get stuck in that hole of logicizing it, is that when that people pleaser part still comes up so strong, is to go to Brene Brown again, that by voicing your needs, you are reminding someone else they can voice their needs too. Which sometimes I'm like, no, I can't have needs. I can't ask. I can't. It's like, what would you tell someone else? And also, you are still impact. This is still connected to someone else.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. I'm going to just like take that last sermon of yours and put it in a loop while I sleep. Hello from goodbye from coming in with the I was thinking of too, you making your spanakopita and I wouldn't be like, oh, Avram's so selfish to set aside a routine and time to like do it. I'm like, wow, how beautiful that he's doing this thing to honor his needs and take care of himself and all of the things.
Yeah, I mean, look, that's been great. Sunday night before classes start, I take a couple hours and I'll make a tray of wonderful spanakopita and got breakfast and snacks for the rest of the week for that. So yeah, it can be something as simple as that.
Thank you so much for coming on. And my central nervous system, whatever words of the different chakras, who knows. I really appreciate your patience with me and your willingness to tease apart all these things and go into what is selfishness and self-centered and self-talk. And it's really fun to get to talk with you. And I learned so much. And I like both emotionally and physics science. And I'm like, oh my gosh, now I need to go process all of this.
Yeah, it's I always enjoy our conversations, and it's a real pleasure to have the opportunity to be back on your podcast again, and have an opportunity that we can sort of share our discussions with a wider audience. I think is really great. So, thank you for thinking of me, and thank you for bringing me on. And it really is always a pleasure, and I learn a lot from it too. And I think one of the things that I enjoy most about our conversations is even though we jump around, ultimately we're also able to zoom out and connect the dots and sort of see how everything that we're talking about fits together in a larger context, which I think is really special. So thank you.
Thank you for that. All warm fuzzies. I love you a lot. I'm really grateful for your time to record again.
Love you too, Annie. Thanks.
Thank you, people, for tuning in and listening, and thanks for being you.